The COVID lab theory gained some traction. In Biden's America, crises are not crises, and non-crises are crises. And anti-racism is racism. This is the new Cancel This show. Welcome to Cancel This, episode 14, recorded late May 2021. I'm your host, Yo Grabba Gabba. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Like our page, facebook.com/PaperProductions. Like our YouTube channel and subscribe right below. Email the show directly, pavementroadproductions@gmail.com. That's pavementroadproductions@gmail.com. We're talking about this week about a handful of topics. First of all, the lab theory. So, the idea that COVID got released from a lab. Now we're going to talk about COVID. There's some debate about all this stuff. So, I'm not saying take this as completely 100%. The only possibility or only possible fact. But we've been saying this for a long time, and all the geniuses in the media and in the scientific community are like, there's no way that ever happened. There's no way it escaped from a lab. It was from people eating bats or different animals, pangolins, in Wuhan. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain type of stuff. But it just didn't make sense. And there's anybody who said that disappeared, in China. A doctor in China, a virologist, had to flee China to come here to the U.S. because she was afraid they were going to kill her and kill her family because she was talking about this stuff. Now, you're either really, really nuts or you really, really believe it, And obviously, what she was saying made sense. What everybody was saying about the lab theory made sense, but you weren't allowed to talk about it. Facebook would censor if you talked about it. And, YouTube, I'm hoping this video isn't going to take it down because I'm talking about something that YouTube may think is wrong. But now that's quote-unquote consensus science, but it's not, clearly, because there's a lot of information that's coming out now. So what does that mean? Well, for starters, it means that censorship should never happen because it's quote-unquote consensus science. All the science says that it came from natural, it would jump from an animal to humans. Well, that doesn't really seem likely now. It doesn't seem true. It seems very likely that it actually came from a lab. So what do we do, right? What do we do? It looks like, that all these people were not being truthful. Dr. Fauci's organization that he funds or he runs or whatever was taking U.S. taxpayer dollars and funneling it to the lab in China where this leak likely occurred. And this whole time, it never came from the lab. The World Health Organization investigated it and had somebody who worked for the organization investigate it. It's like somebody kills somebody and they had the killer investigate the murder. What do you think they're going to find out? It's absolutely ridiculous. And the people who come out saying, there's no way it came from a lab. If you look at their credibility, they all have something to lose if it came from a lab. But again, who cares? Doesn't matter. Shut up. Don't pay attention to that. You crazy person. And all these people are saying it. Well, they have no credibility. Right? The scientists, these quote-unquote scientists who are saying it's you can't go to a church or go to a Trump rally, but you can be in the streets rioting and protesting in honor of George Floyd and looting stores. That's okay because social justice. But you can't go to church. They have no credibility. None. And these same people we're supposed to trust with our lives. This is a gain to them. It's ridiculous. It's insanity. Absolute insanity. But again, you can't ask questions. You're not allowed to ask questions. Censoring people who have different ideas. Censorship that's why we should not. Censorship should not happen. And Graham Allen said he's running for Congress, and I think South Carolina. The guy who got hired by the Blaze, he did all those rants, he became viral. He said we'll be sitting here waiting for Facebook's apology. Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath on Facebook apologizing for censoring all these people who end up being right. They end up being right. I mean, it seems that way. The lab leak theory seems pretty likely at this point. We said there was a high-level lab doing high-level research. They were trying to enhance viruses to make them more deadly, so they could kind of so they can create antidotes. They say so they can create vaccines to prevent to stop them. So they try to basically create a super virus that they can then genetically alter, or they can then get a vaccine for. So that way, if the worst possible virus that's out there, they'll be ready for it. They'll have a vaccine for it. That's what they say, at least. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's what they're saying. And of course, the Chinese military are involved, so you can't trust anything they say. Is that right, John Cena? If you didn't hear that story, John Cena gave an interview about how the first Fast 9, F9, Fast and Furious 9 is going to be released, and the first country who's going to get a chance to see it is Taiwan. But China got mad and said, we're going to cut, we're not going to let you play it here, and all the revenue, the hundreds of millions of dollars you're going to get from revenue from playing in China, you're not going to be able to play in China because we don't believe Taiwan is a country. Taiwan is one of our territories because they're trying to take over Taiwan. So they believe they have right to take over Taiwan, and Taiwan's not an independent country. So they called John Cena and basically said, if you don't apologize, we're going to not let you play the movie here. And so everybody got mad and said, okay, you got to make him apologize, and you get a groveling apology in Chinese. The superhero, right? This big jack dude who's, last I heard was a conservative, is now apologizing in China because he offended China by speaking a fact that Taiwan is its own country. It still is. China wants to take it over, but it's still its own country. And the World Health Organization, who's the propaganda piece for China, right? It's just crazy. Like, if you thought China was lying and not being honest, you're a conspiracy theorist and a Trump supporter. Now that Trump's out of office, it's fine. You can say the truth. Speaking the truth is fine now. So the lab leak theory, right? That's the theory that this virus came from a lab, was genetically altered, and then released from the lab. Well, now they're saying there's a high likelihood that actually did happen. People have been saying that the whole time. They're being told to shut up, being censored. But now it's likely, even Dr. Fauci himself said it's likely that came from a lab. What's with the change? He puts his finger in the wind, and whatever way the wind blows, this way he goes. It's crazy. And he said, we're supposed to trust these people with our lives, and that's what's devastating. That's what's terrifying. We're supposed to trust them with our lives. Obviously, they're not trustworthy. Obviously. They're all just clowns. And if Fauci won't give an interview to Fox News because they've been saying the whole time that he was lying, and now it turns out he was lying. Where's the apology for everybody else? Right? All these other news organizations who are calling everybody who said that everybody who raised the question, is this possible it came from lab? These news organizations that were calling those people crazy conspiracy theorists. It's like it doesn't even matter. They didn't even. It's like it didn't even happen. They're saying they didn't even. Anyway, they're basically making it out that they never said that. Right? We'll check the tape because there's tons and tons of footage of it. That they were just saying everybody who even asked the question is a crazy conspiracy theorist. And now it's likely to be true. And they said the reason it's likely to be true too is that obviously they were doing the testing a few miles from the wet market where they said it started. There's no evidence as well that China covered it up and leaked the story about the wet market. And the lab that was doing this experiments, they said, had very, very, very minimal safety precautions. So the first couple people who got this virus were probably working in the lab. That's what they're saying. Like, end of 2019, November, December of 2019. Likely were Chinese scientists who got this virus. So they have very minimal safety precautions. But all the news organizations, the scientists, the doctors, they're all saying, "Oh, everything's fine." Why would you ever trust them? You can't trust them. You can't trust the quote-unquote consensus science. So moving on now, let's talk about the backward world that we live in now under Biden and his administration. Biden was saying he makes a crisis out of nothing, and then something that actually is a crisis isn't a crisis. Like, for example, the border crisis. People coming in the border, people running across the border, dropping people over the walls, overloaded. The border facilities are overloaded. They can't even ask people their names because they don't have time. There's so many people there. They can't give them a court date. They just say, "Hey, go talk to a lawyer and come to court." Yeah, right. It's like you're charged with a crime, so I'm going to ask you to go get a lawyer and come to court so we can charge you with a crime. Like, are you kidding me? In what world would that ever work? But that's what they have to do because there's no other options. But that's not a crisis. It's not a crisis. And the border's closed. People are coming across the border every day. Like, the Canadian border is closed. You can't go to Canada. Canadians can't come here. For the most part. But there's illegal immigrants streaming across the border daily. Like hundreds, if not thousands, daily coming across the border. But if you call it a crisis, you have to blame Trump for it because obviously Trump's fault. And if you don't call it a crisis, then if it's Biden's fault, then it's not a crisis, right? If it's Biden's fault, it's not a crisis. If it's Trump's fault, it's a crisis. And they said we inherited a mess. No, you inherited a very secure border. Because you wanted to let everybody in, it became a mess. So if the policy was to let everybody come in who wants to come in, then that's what the mess is going to be. That's going to be the crisis. But you inherited a very secure border. So that's not a crisis. Because if it's Biden's fault, it's not a crisis. If it's Trump's fault, it is a crisis. What else? COVID-19 is a crisis. Still a crisis. Guess what? Things are opening up. All the people, the way they were talking, the way the media was talking, the way everybody was talking at the very beginning of this thing, I was expecting bodies in the streets. Like, everywhere. Like, every third person drops dead. And they keep changing the numbers, and they said that about 5% of people who died of COVID died of only COVID, not underlying conditions. So who had other health issues. Just COVID. 5% of the people who died. The survival rate is 99.9% if you get it. And then on top of that, if you get it and you're healthy, it's even less than that. Because 5% of the people who died of COVID alone. It's ridiculous. Like, some of the people died who died with COVID, but they didn't die of COVID. And that's a big difference. A big thing to keep, thing to understand. But COVID's still a crisis. Even though the numbers are down, even though people aren't getting sick, even though the biggest lockdown states are opening up and people aren't just falling dead left and right. But that's still a crisis because we still need to, ram down more legislation. Joe Biden wants his next budget to be $6 trillion. How stupid are liberals? They did a survey, I remember the organization did a survey. They said that about 50% of liberals surveyed who watch CNN, MSNBC, CBS, all those, about 50% of them surveyed said that they believe the national debt is $5 trillion or less. $5 trillion or less. Yeah, in like 1980. I mean, Obama himself like tripled the national debt. And then Biden just spent another almost 10 trillion. Wants to spend almost 10 trillion. And that's fine, just tax the rich, right? They say tax the rich, tax the rich. The rich, do you know that the top 50% of the country pays 100% of taxes? Fact. The top 50% of the country pays 100% of the taxes in the country. So the rich are being taxed. Are they being taxed enough? That's debatable. But they want to pay their fair share, You know what? The billionaires and trillionaires, not trillionaires, the billionaires and multi-millionaires, they use the tax loopholes to get around that. So they don't pay that much taxes. Who pays taxes? Families who make 80 grand or to 100. Those are the ones who get killed. 200 grand, 300 grand, those people are the ones who get killed. The ones who make multi-millions of dollars a year, they don't pay much in taxes. And they've been saying for how many years they want to get rid of those tax loopholes. Well, they get rid of tax loopholes because those companies fund the candidates. That's why. They can't pass anything because they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. The politicians don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. Very simple. Economics is not a crisis. It's not a crisis because it's Joe Biden's fault. It's not a crisis. People can't. I mean, here, I saw this. It blew my mind. It blew my mind. McDonald's, who's paying $15 an hour minimum, $15 an hour wage, right? People say, "Want 15? Want 15? Want 15? Want 15? Fight for 15? Fight for 15?" They get $15 an hour minimum wage. The government's paying them all this money in unemployment, so they're not taking the job at McDonald's for $15 an hour. So McDonald's not going to pay $18 an hour. $18 an hour to flip a burger, to put fries in a fryer. $18 an hour. I mean, obviously, a lot more of these things are getting automated, obviously, as they need to be, so these companies can survive. But $18 an hour wage, and people are like, "Oh, finally, they're paying people a living wage." I thought 15 was minimum wage. I thought 15 was living wage. What happened to 15? What happened to fight for 15? They give you 15, now you want 18. They're giving you 18, you're going to want 20. They're going to give you 20, you're going to want 25. How about that give you $100 an hour minimum wage? They'll have one employee who works there all day, 24 hours a day. They make $100 an hour. It's insanity. But that's what happens when you give them a cookie. That's what happens when you give in to protesters. Instead of telling them to shut up and go home, instead of telling them, "Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about," those who are in the fight for 15 don't know what they're talking about. They don't know economics. And $15 an hour, when the government is going to pay you more than that to stay home and do nothing, or basically that amount to stay home and do nothing, why wouldn't you? But that's not Joe Biden's fault. Okay? We had, it's COVID's fault, or it's something else's fault. It's not the fact that he's literally giving people, and so now some states, red states, are canceling that. They're saying, "We're not accepting any of your federal unemployment benefits." Well, the states will still pay what they're paying, and then they're not going to add on the federal, because a lot of people go back to work. But $15 an hour minimum wage, yeah, that's what we wanted the whole time, right? But now we got that, it's still not enough. You give them a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk. Period. But the economic crisis is not a crisis. Inflation is not a crisis. Inflation's not a crisis. Joe Biden spending money that's never been created, never been printed. Not a crisis. It's fine. No big deal. Not a crisis. Price of lumber going up. Price of raw materials going up. Not a crisis. Gasoline shortages. Definitely not a crisis. No way is that a crisis. Not a crisis. Not even a little bit of a crisis. The fact that we've had now multiple companies pay ransom to terrorists because of ransomware attacks. And Joe Biden allowed them. He said, if you want to negotiate with them, negotiate. If you want to negotiate with terrorists, go ahead and negotiate with terrorists. But that's not a crisis. The fact that we have to do all this new solar, all this new wind energy. We can't drill. And by the way, now Russia got their pipeline finished because they removed the sanctions so they could finish their pipeline. But our pipeline, the Keystone pipeline, is shut down. But the Nord Stream pipeline is not shut down. So Russia can make all this money and be energy independent. But the U.S. has to be going back to the Stone Age. America last under Joe Biden. But it's not a crisis. Who cares if you can't go to work? Who cares if you can't drive your car? Just stay home and collect government money. You don't need to go to work. It's not a crisis. We may displace a polar bear or a penguin in Alaska. We don't need to have gasoline for our vehicles. Get an electric vehicle. Shut up. Not a crisis. The other crisis, though, according to, I guess, the FBI, CIA, the number one threat to America right now is, wait for it, white supremacy. White Christian conservatives are the number one. The QAnon crazies. The QAnon people who are supposed to be rioting and taking and burning down the Capitol building and throwing Joe Biden out of office. Remember when, I think it was CNN interviewed a guy named Ken, and he said, Trump's the real president. We're gonna overthrow that in like a couple weeks. Yeah, that was like months ago. That's not a crisis. That is a crisis. White supremacy is a crisis. There's too many white supremacists. Do you know one? Pick one. Can you think of any one that you know as a white supremacist? Anyone? Anything? How many people have died in the name of QAnon? I mean, the one person who stormed the Capitol building got shot and killed. That's one. The police officer who died at the Capitol building probably didn't die of anything that happened at the Capitol building, but died of maybe a heart attack later. But wasn't attacked or killed by a protester or a quote-unquote rioter or a quote-unquote insurrectionist. But it's such a crisis they're trying to do a 9/11 style commission to find out what happened. What's not a crisis, however, is BLM burning down cities. Still. They got what they wanted in every aspect, and they're still burning down stuff. Crime is up, 500% in Portland over last year? 30%, 80%, 50% in all these states that defund the police and BLM riots and protests. Billions of dollars in damage, countless people dead. But that's not a crisis. It's just an idea. Where else is the crisis? In the environment. Because in like 10 years, we're all going to be dead. I mean, according to the quote-unquote scientists. They said it like every year for like the last 100 years. And we were carbon neutral. We were the lowest of all the major countries in the world, all the G20 countries. The U.S. had the least amount of carbon emissions under Trump. That is now changing the Biden because he's all about the environment. So they're actually polluting more because he's all about the environment. But if they put everything that Biden wants to do into place, it'll cost us hundreds of billions of dollars, and it will lower the temperature of the Earth by 1 degree over the next 100 years. Meanwhile, China and India and all those other countries are going to be increasing what they're doing. China's drilling for oil right now. So they're actually going to be doing more damage than they had been doing previously. And their economy is stronger. And they're not spending all this money. But it's fine. Because the environment is a crisis, and the U.S. is going to stop it. The U.S. is going to... Who cares what the rest of the world is doing, including all the damage they're doing to the environment? The U.S. is going to stop it, and it's a crisis. There was a leaked article that came out that said, in order to protect the environment, the government right now owns about 10 to 50% of all the land and water in the country. The government owns about 10-15% of it. They want to increase that by 2030 to 30%. And then it's outrageous, but by 2050 they want to increase it to 50%. There's no way they'll be able to do that. There's no way to be able to get to 50%. But by 2030, the U.S. government wants to own 30% of all water and land in the country. Well, you're asking, well, how that works? There's more people. They're importing more people. They're bringing more people over the border. They're bringing in more illegal immigrants. How? How are they going to do this? Well, they'll just take land. Eminent domain. They'll just take the land and say, well, here's some money for your house and for your land. We're confiscating this land. They've done it before. They'll do it again. Well, where are we all going to live? Because if they do that, they move you to somewhere else. Well, we all live in the cities. They'll just build high rises and everybody will just live in there. In those. That's fine. If you have a house, you're racist anyways. Having a house is racist. Having your own land is racist. Obviously. Because other people don't have what you have. So if you worked hard and got what you got, or even if you inherited it from somebody else who worked hard, or if you won the lottery, who cares? You have more than somebody else, you don't deserve that, give it away. Give it back. Until everybody's equal in every way, we can't have our lives back. We can't live normal lives until everybody's equal in every single way. Equity, baby. Gotta love it. But in the name of environment and climate change, they have all these radical policies. We have tear down roads and tear down throughways and highways because those are racist too, apparently. That's what they said. Doesn't make any sense because it divides communities. Because roads go down the middle of the community, so people can't, they can't come into the city or out of the city without a throughway or a highway. But who cares? Because having a throughway or a highway makes it more difficult for people to live in those areas. Okay, so just stay in your own little town and don't ever leave. So don't watch Netflix. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about anti-racism. We probably won't get too much detail in this today, but I do want to spend a little time talking about it. The anti-racism idea that racism, being against racism is wrong. Is being against racism or not being racist is wrong. You have to be anti-racist. What is anti-racist? It means against racism. What's racism? Systemic racism. So anything that doesn't have equal outcomes is racist. So if you're not against that, if you're not a communist or a socialist, you're a racist. Your options are to be a communist or a socialist or a racist. That's anti-racist. That's critical race theory. Just saw an article that Popeyes, I don't know what location or for just a corporate thing that was a mess up, but they said they reserve the right to not serve white people at Popeyes. And the critical race theory is getting into medical field, right? I mean, can you imagine critical race theory in the medical field? Well, equity, the same outcome. So, well, we've had, 10 black people died of this disease, and only 2 white people, and there's a white person and a black person who both need the treatment. We only have room for one. Well, it's going to the black person. The white person gets to die because there's been more black people that have died of it than white people. That's not a far stretch. That could happen. But anti-racist, you have to be a racist to be not racist. MLK said, judge people by the content of the character, not the color of skin. Well, now, color of your skin is the only thing that matters. Literally the only thing. If you're white, you're automatically racist unless you're anti-racist. If you believe that people have the right to make their own decisions, you're a racist. Ben Shapiro has been saying, he says it's soft bigotry of low expectations. Jason Whitlock, the former, I think he was on ESPN, or maybe Fox, FS1, or I don't remember what. He was a sports guy. He tweeted back to Ben Shapiro, it's not the soft bigotry of low expectations, it's the hard bigotry of no expectation. We have to readjust everything because some people don't do as well. Airline pilots. We have to have more, I think it was American? Or I think it was United. News United came out and said, we need to have more black and women pilots. So even if the numbers, the testing and the practices and all that end up with the highest graduating people happen to be white men, we're going to lower the standard so we can have more inclusion. I want my pilot to be able to fly and land the plane. That's what I want. I don't care if they're Chinese. I don't care if they're Indian. I don't care if they're black. I don't care if they're green. I want them to be able to land the plane and take off and fly it. That's what I want them to be able to do. I don't care what their color is. I don't care. I don't care if they have 15 heads and 15 heads and 30 toes. I don't care. Can they land the plane? Can they take it off? Say my doctor. Critical race theory getting into the medical field is a disaster. It is a disaster. I don't want my doctor to be woke. I don't care if my doctor is woke. I care that my doctor can save my life if I need him. Period. I don't care what my doctor's background is. I don't care if my doctor's, again, I don't care what color they are. I don't care what race they are. I don't care what religion they are. I want them to be able to do a good job. Period. Do their job. Period. Finally, one other thing that just popped in my head here I want to mention, back to the crisis thing a little bit too. And it kind of goes into racism, remember that too. Asians getting attacked in the streets. Biden, I think, came out a couple days ago and said that they're gonna, it's a national emergency and they need to look into why this is happening and try and stop it. It's funny though, because all of a sudden Jews being getting attacked in the street by Palestinians, by woke leftists, liberals, attacking Jews in the streets because of the Palestine and Israel conflict. So now, after all these people are being attacked, they're going to try to find a way to link it to Trump. You know that. You know they're going to try to find a way to link it to Trump, and it's Trump's fault somehow. Because he said China virus, which we know it did originate from China and probably in a lab. But he said China virus, so now he was, by saying that it was a dog whistle for white supremacists to beat up Asians. Except white people haven't been beating up Asians, but mostly minorities beating up Asians. Blacks and Hispanics mostly beating up Asians. But now Jews are getting attacked in the streets again, left and right. There was a story of I think from a New York soccer team. And they asked him, three men came up to him and asked him while he's walking, "Hey, are you Jewish?" And he was very scared, and he started reaching in their pockets for knives. And he said, "No, I'm not Jewish." And they kind of talked to him for a minute, and then they left. And when they left, he turned and asked us, what would you say if I was Jewish? And they said, "We're going to effing kill you." And he is Jewish, but he said he wasn't, and then they left, and he got away. But we're now looking into the crisis, right? So the possibility that some people were stupid and went in the Capitol building. Most people went in the Capitol building, went in, and there's not been a single person been charged with insurrection. Not one. Not one person went in the Capitol building and was charged with insurrection. They were charged with trespassing. Right? Because most of the people who were in the Capitol building didn't break anything to walk in. The doors were already open, already broken open or whatever, and they walked in. So they weren't supposed to be there, but they weren't storming the Capitol. They didn't burn stuff down, push the doors down, and run in. Most people were there. Were just there. They were in the Capitol building. They weren't supposed to be there, so they were trespassing. But that's a crisis. We need to look into that. Find out why there are white people in the Capitol building. We need to look into why Asians are being beaten up in the streets. That was been happening for a long time. You should have looked into that a long time ago, Joe. But now why Jews are going to be up in the streets, well, that might be Biden's fault, so we don't want to look into that. Shut up. Because Biden has been throwing the Jerusalem under the bus and throwing Israel under the bus because we don't, because Democrats hate Jews. So, going to throw them under the bus because, and then when they get beat up in the streets and attacked by, Biden supporters, when Biden voters attack Jews in the streets and riot and burn stuff, that's not a problem. That's not a crisis. The only crisis is something that involves a white person. They just had Molly Tippett's case when she was killed by an illegal immigrant. They just convicted the guy yesterday, I believe. In the last couple of days. For killing that girl. How come that wasn't like national? How come every news article, every news organization isn't running that story? That's a huge story. But nobody's talking about it. Why? Oh, because it's not a white person doing something wrong. Only news stories are white people doing something wrong. Because that fits into the critical race theory part of it. White people are the enemy. They're the devil. And if they do something wrong, it's because the country itself is evil. But if somebody else does something wrong, it's no big deal. It's just it's one person made a mistake, right? But if one person makes a mistake, it's because the whole country's wrong. Because the whole country's evil. If one white person makes a mistake, it's because it's racism and the whole country's evil. We're not even going to say it's racist. We're not even going to try to show evidence of racism, but it's racism. It is. Shut up. But if a minority of a Hispanic or a black person does something wrong, it was just a mistake. It was just, and it's actually probably a white person's fault anyways. It was probably the community because they were, George Floyd was just getting his life back together when he moved to Minnesota. Even though he'd been in jail 9 times. And his family, and Joe Biden invites his family to the White House because, he's a hero. He's a hero. His family didn't know him. They weren't a part of his life at all, but now they're all millionaires because he died. Exciting stuff. Be sure to subscribe. See if I miss anything. You can like this post, share it, tell your friends. We speak truth here. And we gotta get more people here because if they're watching CNN and MSNBC and all that stuff, they're not hearing the truth. That's for sure. We also want to get more shows out soon. Maybe a sports show here or there. Maybe a hockey playoff talk or something about baseball or football season. Be sure to subscribe to miss anything. Like our page, facebook.com/PaperMoreProductions. Email us at papermoreproductions@gmail.com. Like I said, subscribe right below on the YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. We'll try to get this out, more out in the next week or so. There's always a lot to talk about. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye, Dan.